I'd like to get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Anna Berry, the Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, and on behalf of our board and staff, I'd like to welcome you to the 2012 Global Forum, and thank you for supporting our annual fundraiser. I'd like to start with a story to set the stage for a night that celebrates and sustains global education. It was my second day at the council, marked by gray, rainy skies, much like today, and a dozen of our international visitors were meeting with the Red Cross in Concord. The group, all from Southwest Asia, was visiting our state to exchange ideas about how communities respond to social issues. In the few minutes I had to make small talk, I said hello to a nonprofit leader from Pakistan and remarked on the rainy day by saying I wished he could have had better weather for his trip to New Hampshire. "It's funny," he said, with a wide smile. "In my country, many times we're so happy for rain that we would never say such a thing." It was my first time on the job, and definitely not the last, where I was reminded how much we can all learn from one another, both the big and the small. And I'm sure everyone here recognizes the tremendous value of global education and understanding. But let me remind you again how the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire is making a difference here and across the world. Over the next few months, we'll be bringing more than 60 emerging leaders from around the globe to the Granite State. Our International Visitors Program is not only increasing global competency in New Hampshire by connecting citizens like you with these visitors, but it's also improving the image of our state and our country abroad and serving as a catalyst for economic development and renewal here at home. We'll send 3 New Hampshire teachers to Turkey to explore the country's history and culture and bring what they've learned back to our state's classrooms, furthering cross-cultural understanding. And we'll be taking you and others beyond the headlines with experts on North Korea, on Syria, and on the global marketplace, fostering knowledge of world affairs. When I hear one of our state's congressmen congratulate a group of Moldovan politicians on creating and sustaining democracy in what used to be the Soviet Union, and reminding them that even our own democracy here is still a work in progress, I know we're making a difference. When I hear a student say she's gained a new perspective that couldn't be found in her high school history book after attending a talk on the Arab Spring, I know we're making a difference. If this were the Miss America pageant, well, I wouldn't be standing here, but I would also say we're making a difference by helping to create world peace. Is that a stretch? Well, as Senator Mitchell said when he accepted the Presidential Medal of Freedom 14 years ago, because we have the most powerful military force in our history, some in our country appear to feel that our rhetoric must be as loud as our weaponry. But the opposite is true. The stronger we are, the less we need to brag about it. At the right time and place, American idealism and optimism, combined with patience, understanding, and encouragement, can be valuable weapons in the quest for peace. So join us in creating global understanding and shaping foreign policy, one person at a time, here in our corner of the world, by continuing to support your World Affairs Council. And a special thank you to our most loyal supporters, our board members. I'd like to ask all of them present tonight to stand. These are the people who make it possible for us to make a difference. Thank you. I know you're here. I'd also like to invite everyone here who's a member of the council to stand and be recognized for helping sustain our organization. Thank you. If you agree, as we do, that it's critical to prepare the next generation of American decision makers to thrive in tomorrow's world, stand with us too. I ask you to fill out the form on your seat and become a member of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire tonight. Now I'd like to invite board member Herb Pence to the stage to thank our very generous sponsors and patrons.
Thank you, Anna. As we begin this wonderful evening with Senator Mitchell, it is my pleasure to recognize firms and individuals who made this evening possible. Besides this evening, their and your enthusiastic support makes possible the World Affairs Council programming throughout the year. We're We're not doing calisthenics tonight, but please stand as your organization's name is read. And please hold your applause until all the sponsors have been recognized. The presidential sponsor for this evening is a law firm of Preety Flaherty, which is up in Concord. And several of the firm's attorneys are here with us tonight. If you're here, please stand. The World Affairs Council especially wishes to thank the oldest partner, Harold Pacheas, and also the director, Simon Leeming, for their support. Mr. Leeming also serves as New Zealand's honorary counsel for New England. Our mission partner is Southern New Hampshire University. That's right here. We wish to acknowledge the ambassador-sponsored list, which begins in Concord with Lincoln Financial Services. Anybody here from Lincoln? No? Okay, moving south to Manchester is the Amoskeag Airport Service. Finally, just before you leave the state is Rivier College. I know you guys are here. Up you come. There they go. In Nashua. Also due thanks to the council sponsors Boynton, Waldron, Doliak, Woodman, and Scott, PA of Portsmouth, Fidelity Investments in Merrimack, the Harbor Group Incorporated, Bedford, McLean Law Firm in Manchester, and Pax World Mutual Funds in Portsmouth. Our diplomat sponsor is Sheehan, Finney, Bass, and Green Law Firm, and we thank the Farm and Flower Market for its in-kind contributions. Both of them are from Manchester. When you have the opportunity, please look at your program for a list of the patrons. These are individuals and couples who have made a special contribution to support tonight's and evening with Senator George Mitchell. Please give a round of applause to all the supporters and the patrons. Thank you. And if you want to be a supporter of our next major program, please call Anna at the World Affairs office, but give her a day or two to recover from this effort. Anna, where did Anna go? Oh, Anna's behind me. Okay.
Now I'd like to introduce a very special guest, Jim Choquette. Jim has been a social studies teacher at Londonderry High School for more than 20 years, and with the help of one of our programs, had the opportunity to travel to Turkey last summer. He's here to tell you in his own words how the World Affairs Council is making a difference. Please join me in thanking Jim for his work teaching our state students about the world.
You'd think somebody who stood in front of children all day would be able to do this with no problems. My heart is going so fast. Hello, my name is Jim Choquette, and I'm a veteran social studies teacher at Londonderry High School. And I was asked to briefly explain the wonderful opportunity I was presented with last summer. As you all know, the World Affairs Council is involved in many fantastic and far-reaching projects throughout New Hampshire, the United States, and the world. The World Affairs Council has as its goal to provide opportunity locally for everyone to become a world citizen, while at the same time educating, inspiring, and engaging Americans in international affairs and critical global issues of our times. The World Affairs Council hit the mark last summer. I and another teacher from New Hampshire had the opportunity, through the sponsorship of the World Affairs Council and the Turkish Cultural Foundation, to travel to Turkey for 2 weeks. In Turkey, New Hampshire teachers met with, joined with, and learned with teachers from other World Affairs Council states. I was lucky enough to travel with a group from Montana, Hawaii, the District of Columbia, Pennsylvania, and Alabama. Now, this in itself would have been a fantastic learning opportunity. This in itself would have given me the opportunity to meet with my colleagues, my peers, to learn and to grow. But then, that this happened all in Turkey, that was phenomenal. In Turkey, I had an opportunity to get rid of some of the preconceived notions I had as an American. I've often taught about Turkey. I teach advanced placement European history and economics. But I have to say that perhaps the point of view I once held was a bit Eurocentric. That whenever I talked about Turkey, I was always talking about Turkey versus the Christian European states, the Ottoman Empire, and then its demise. After visiting Turkey, within 24 hours of arriving and meeting with the members of the Turkish Cultural Foundation, my eyes were opened, my preconceived notions shot, and I've learned so much. The World Affairs Council allowed me, as a teacher, to visit the Ottoman and Byzantine ruins in Constantinople, or Istanbul. I traveled to the World War I battlefields at Gallipoli, or as the Turks would say, Çanakkale. I saw the ruins of classical Troy, a caravanserai in Bursa. I saw the emphasis of St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians. I saw the monasteries of Cappadocia, and I saw the modern city of Ankara. What did I learn? I learned more than dates. I learned more than ruins. I learned more than historical names. I learned a lot about myself, and I learned that there's so much I can bring back and teach my students. Not a day goes by when I don't find some way to work my experiences in, and I've grown as an individual, and I think they have as well. The World Affairs Council gave me a gift that I believe I could never pay back. But every time I share my experiences with my students, a smile crosses my face. This once-in-a-lifetime experience made me a world citizen. The World Affairs Council tries so hard to foster this, and they succeeded. I want to thank the World Affairs Council. I want to thank everybody who's here tonight, and I hope that the teachers who are going next summer have the opportunity I had. It was a fantastic experience. Thank you.
Finally, I'd like to introduce someone whose dedication to global education and our council inspires me personally, Karen Erickson. Karen is a board member and the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences here at Southern New Hampshire University, which is the council's mission partner. We couldn't be more grateful for all that the institution and Karen do to support our critical work. Karen Erickson.
To welcome everyone to our Occupy World Fairs evening. On behalf of Southern New Hampshire University, and of equal pleasure is the opportunity to introduce Senator George Mitchell, one of the rare individuals of our universe who gets things done and gets ultimate respect for doing so. That respect comes very much alive in so many different ways. Voted by a bipartisan Senate group of aides, congressional aides, as the most respected member of the Senate, I cannot think of a single individual in our chambers of commerce today, who would or could earn that accolade for a year, let alone to earn it for 6 consecutive years when George Mitchell held that title. And who, in the state of Maine, has been elected to the U.S. Senate with 81% of the popular vote as Senator Mitchell gathered in 1988. Living in Maine at that time, I can personally testify that you were one popular, cool candidate. Even-headedness and meticulous even-handedness are part of what make Senator Mitchell's work tick. Neutrality in negotiation, however, does not diminish his passion in and for argumentation. The clear determination in his voice rang out on the Senate floor for 15 years on environmental legislation, aid to housing and to education, child care, Americans with disabilities, free trade, and yes, U.S. relations with the rest of the world. And that is a large rest of world, where he chaired the peace negotiations that raised the Good Friday Agreement between the Republic of Ireland and British-controlled Northern Ireland, chaired the International Crisis Group, and had at least 2 tours of duty in the Middle East, the first under President Clinton, and then his appointment by a 2-day-old Obama administration to step into brimstone and rocket fire as the president's special envoy to the Middle East. An intractable situation in an intractable world where George Mitchell just keeps on going with faith in people and their capacity to make peace. The real key to George Mitchell's public life is his profound belief in the next generation. He believes in nurturing them to lead, in sharing with them the wisdom and experience of his efforts in achieving the common good. And he believes in taking them seriously. I have no better example than the North American Student Seminar, a group of Canadian and American students that I brought to Washington, D.C. to discuss with all kinds of political leaders U.S.-Canadian cooperation on relations with the Soviet Union and Europe. We ran for 5 years and deployed ourselves around Washington. Do you want to bring it up? Usually on office floors. One of those was that of Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, who always took the time to let students know that what they thought counted. This is a quarter of a century ago. He didn't come lightly or early to, or lately to the business of understanding that young people make a difference. Senator Mitchell's accomplishments and contributions, we can say goodbye. Senator Mitchell's accomplishments and contributions to our character as a nation and to our security as a global society are the reason for his having been named one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And he is with us tonight. Please welcome Senator Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that very, indeed overly generous introduction. But I do want to say to you in response that I was so inspired by your effort to promote better U.S.-Canada relations that I later went out and married a Canadian. Now, she doesn't know what the real reason was, so don't tell her. I want to thank Anna and all associated with the World Affairs Forum here, the sponsors, Pretty Flaherty, a firm with which I was once associated, Southern New Hampshire University, and all of the others who are mentioned in the program. I am very grateful, Karen, for the kind words that you spoke in my behalf, but I know better than anyone else in the room the vast gap between your words and reality. And so I took it with a grain of salt, and it brought back to my mind a recent occasion, not recent, a few years ago, when I wasn't quite as skeptical as I am now. When I completed my work in Northern Ireland, I wrote a book about it, and when the book was published, I went on one of the obligatory book tours around the country to promote it. After several days of receiving lavish and increasingly untruthful introductions, my wife commented that I was getting a really swelled head because I was obviously believing what was being said. And I said, well, what makes you say that? She said, well, you may not have noticed it, but you're passing notes up to the introducer. And she said, the other night, one guy left out one of your honors and you berated him after the talk. And I said, no, it's not getting to me. Well, the final event on this tour was the Irish American Club of Stamford, Connecticut. I know there are some Irish Americans here because they're in every audience. And the one thing I learned on that tour is that there are more Irish American clubs than there are Irish Americans in the United States. So by the time I got there and I'd been listening to all these introductions, my head was about this big and I could just barely squeeze in the front door. So when we walked in, the first person I encountered was an elderly woman who rushed up to me in such a haste that she bumped into me and said, I'm so thrilled to meet you. She said, I don't even live around here. She said, I drove 2.5 hours to come down here just to shake your hand and to get you to sign my poster. She said, will you do so? She had a big poster in hand. I said, well, yes, of course. So she handed me the poster and handed me a pen, and I looked at it before signing it, and I said to her, I'm very happy to sign your poster, but I just want you to know I'm not Henry Kissinger. His picture was on the poster. And her jaw dropped, and she said, you're not? She said, well, who are you anyway? And when I told her, she said, "Oh my God, this is terrible." She said, "I drove 2.5 hours to meet Henry Kissinger. Now all I've got is you." Well, that deflated me, and it took me back to an earlier time. The year I got the 81% of the vote, I had a similar experience, not identical. I was campaigning door to door in a rural area in central Maine, a couple of days. And on the first day, one of the farms I went to was a dairy farm, and the farmer was very proud of the fact that just a few weeks before, he'd completed a deal to sell 2 of his prize cows to the government of Saudi Arabia. They were in the process of upgrading their dairy stock, and this guy had 2 prize cows, and he made the deal with Saudi Arabia. He said, "Would you come out and have your picture taken with my cows?" One of the secrets of success in politics is the ability to make a fool of yourself gracefully. So I went out and I had my picture taken with 2 cows. And it appeared in the newspaper the next morning. And I was completing my door-to-door the next morning, and I knocked on the door at one farmhouse. It's a real long way, dirt road in off the main road. And this crusty old Maine farmer answered, trying to think of something to say. I said, "You got a really long driveway." He said, "Well, yeah, if it was any shorter, it wouldn't reach my house." So I said to him, "Well, I'm Senator Mitchell." He said, "I know who you are." I said, "How do you know that?" He said, "I seen your picture in the paper with them cows." I said, "What'd you think about it?" He said, "Senator, I'm a Republican. I think we should keep the cows here and send you to Saudi Arabia." Just a few weeks later, I got 81% of the vote, and I happened to be driving through that small town on my way back to Waterville, where I grew up, and I was sorely tempted to stop in. But I resisted the temptation, and I went back on my way. Well, I'm glad to be able to participate in this forum. I'm going to speak for a while, and then be glad to take your questions. Karen's going to moderate the question-answer period. The world, as this forum is named after, is a big place, and there are a lot of affairs going on in the world at any given time. So I can't cover them all. But I am going to touch just briefly on 3 subjects: Europe, the so-called Arab Spring, and then the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It goes without saying that in a talk of a half hour or so, one can only get into so much detail. So if I don't touch on some aspect of that or any other issue that you're interested in, please feel free to raise it in the question period with Karen. I want to begin by asking you to go back a little more than a half century to the aftermath of the Second World War, when in an effort to stabilize the peace, to encourage growth and prosperity, the United States led the world in the creation of new international institutions and alliances. The United Nations was created, NATO was established, the European Union was founded, Germany and Japan were helped in their rebuilding, and they became democratic and resurgent. So what started as the North Atlantic Alliance, a discussion between U.S. and British leaders during the conflict, became one of the most successful collaborations in history. The intention was and remains to embed the nations of Europe into political, economic, and military alliances that would make it less likely that the European history of warfare would be repeated. Recall, if you will, that between 1870 and 1945, that is, three-quarters of a century before the Second World War, Europe was devastated by three major land wars. In the Second World War, in countries whose populations were smaller than they are today, between 55 and 60 million people were killed. And large areas of Europe, including many major cities, were laid to waste. By contrast, in the three-quarters of a century since then, Europe has been largely at peace. There, of course, continue to be some regional and local conflicts, but measured against the modern history of Europe, the absence of major war, even of its possibility now, is heartening. And that's why it's so important that we encourage the European nations to resolve their current financial crisis in a manner that does not undermine their impressive political achievements in the recent past. The North Atlantic Alliance and what flowed from it is an example of extraordinary leadership and international collaboration at a turning point in history. We now face new challenges, and we still need extraordinary leadership. One challenge which did not exist ever in human history before the Second World War is the potential proliferation of nuclear weapons. The United States led the world into the nuclear age, and we've led the effort to restrain the distribution of these destructive weapons with some degree of success. There are many countries who now have the capacity to develop nuclear weapons who voluntarily refrain from doing so in reliance upon the United States. But North Korea has raised the number of countries with such weapons to 9, and Iran is trying to make it 10. Iran's program in particular could, if realized, trigger a collapse in non-proliferation and a large increase in the number of nuclear powers in a relatively short period of time. Almost certainly, it will trigger an immediate and widespread nuclear arms race in the Middle East. So it is of the highest importance that our country sustain and intensify the effort to limit the spread of nuclear weapons. Human history is, in large part, a tale of conflict, how they began, how they ended. But there is now a greater urgency, first because of nuclear weapons. Nuclear war might be the end to all conflicts, not an end to a conflict. There are other reasons for concern as well. The number of people on Earth is rising rapidly. The number of nation states continues to grow and is nearing 200. The number of non-state organizations which rely on acts of terror continues to increase. Rapid technological developments make it much easier to start and conduct conflicts than it is to prevent or end them. And sadly, inequality, injustice, and the absence of freedom are still a reality of life for vast numbers of people around the world. And at the same time, poverty, famine, and disease, conquerable disease, continue at appallingly high levels. It took 18 centuries following the birth of Christ for the world's population to reach 1 billion. The most recent billion was added in 15 years. Think about that. 1,800 years for the first billion, 15 years for the 7th billion. Although the rate of increase has recently slowed in some parts of the world, a credible estimate is that by the middle of this century, there will be between 9.5 and 10 billion people on Earth. And almost all of that growth will take place in poor and less developed countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. That means more competition for land, for water, for economic growth, and for political power, and inevitably more conflict. Much as we would like to imagine a world in which conflict does not exist, that is simply not going to be realistic in the coming century. And especially since technology continues to enhance the ability of human beings to kill ever larger numbers of other humans with fewer resources and fewer people. I saw some of these effects firsthand in Northern Ireland. I spent 5 years there, chairing 3 separate and related discussions. The main negotiation lasted nearly 2 years. In the end, we were able to get an agreement, thanks in large part to the courage of the political leaders of Northern Ireland. They are ordinary men and women. They spent most of their adult lives in conflict, and yet, at a critical moment in their nation's history, they rose to the occasion and came together for peace. Under intense criticism from hardliners on both sides, they made principled compromises that put at risk their careers and their lives. There are ideologues everywhere in the world, and there were many in Northern Ireland who regarded any compromise, any concession, as a sign of weakness, a lack of conviction, indeed, an act of treason. And so these men and women risked their careers, and many of them sacrificed their careers, risked their lives. 2 of the delegates were assassinated during the talks, and risked the safety of their families. But in so doing, they brought peace